Here's my once upon a time with Law Roach. I met Law back in 2015. I had been a celebrity photojournalist, aka paparazzi, for about 2 years. Paps, for the most part, especially back then, were freelancers, and it was back then a pretty crowded field. And I was always looking for new opportunities, new ways to make money. And often these opportunities involve going off the beaten path. There were no A-listers, too much competition, way too much effort for very little profit in the long run. I just like to make my money the smart way. I like for my time, whatever time I put into something, to pay off. Also, going after A-listers involved the chase, the follow. They don't like to say the word chase. And I can't do much of that on public transportation. And I don't dare bike in New York City. You have to navigate a gauntlet of cars and cabs and a lot of clueless pedestrians. So instead of chasing the Brads and Angelinas, I often photograph Black celebrities, subjects my fellow paps always told me never sold. Interestingly enough, I was told this by other paparazzi of color, Black and Latino paparazzi. But they do sell. Yeah, it's not a question of if a photo is going to sell. It's really a question of when and for how much. By the way, my photos did sell. Back in 2015, popular Black bloggers needed photos. And I, of course, was happy to fulfill their needs. Okay, back to that night in 2015 when I met Law Roach. It was spring, April to be exact. I was waiting in what seemed to be pitch black darkness. It really wasn't that dark, but it was dark for New York City standards. I was waiting outside of a building where Bravo's Watch What Happens Live was being recorded. Brandy and R&B singer Jasmine Sullivan were guests. I was by myself that night, no fans and no other paparazzi were present. I think I have to say this, while I was waiting, I wasn't hiding behind a bush or behind some kind of potted plant. I never did that then and I don't do it now. For the average celeb, that kind of behavior is totally unnecessary. Watch What Happens Live host and executive producer Andy Cohen left first. He still had his dog Waka and wasn't a papa yet. That was years away. I always took a photo of Andy and Waka, either entering or leaving the building. I was one of the first to do so. I say one of, just in case there's somebody else who may have done it also back then. When my colleagues saw what I already knew, that magazines love celebrities and their pets, they started taking photos of Andy and his dog as well. Andy always gave up the shot, as they say. He never avoided the camera. He smiled and walked confidently with Waka leading the way. He created the perfect photo, and all I had to do was take it. Done, done, and done. It's been damn near 10 years and a whole pandemic since that evening, and I'm pressed to remember exactly how it happened, how I met Law Roach. I think it's pretty safe to say that Law, who was then styling Tamar, Braxton, Zendaya, and Brandy, approached me prior to Brandy and Jasmine leaving the building. Yeah, the fact that he probably introduced himself to me is far more likely because he wasn't that guy then. And he more than likely asked me to take a photo of Brandy and Jasmine as they were leaving the building, which I agreed to do. Brandy was about to make her Broadway debut and become a local media darling, and I was about to get a peek behind the curtain of celebrity style. When Brandy and Jasmine left the Watch What Happens Live building that night, they created the perfect photo. They looked like two girlfriends. They could have been leaving the club or a fancy restaurant. Brandy is such a pro in so many ways, and she has a knack, like Andy, for creating the perfect publishable shot. I showed Law the photo in camera, and he loved it. He gave me his number. He told me he also styled Zendaya and might give me a call to get some candids of her while she was in town. By the way, that photo of Brandy and Jasmine, it was published on Essence.com, and Law was more than pleased. As I was thinking about how I met Law, I had to recreate the timeline to figure out where Z was, Z as in Zendaya, was in her career. She had her iconic Oscars moment. That happened in February when red carpet reporter Juliana Rancic made an unfortunate remark about Zendaya's hair, which Zendaya took as racially derogatory. I'm not going to get into the details of that whole affair. What I did notice and what did happen as a result was that Vogue took notice and made the young Z their de facto red carpet it girl to watch. And Law, her stylist, who I found to be at that time very respectful, mild-mannered, and very businesslike, was on his way, but far from there yet. That would come later. That would come next year, when he started styling a certain celebrated songstress named Celine Dion. I was not new to Z. I had taken photos of her at a previous Fashion Week event, a couple of events, and Law was by her side as well as her dad. And Z was really young back then, and her photos were more likely to be published in teen magazines as opposed to regular, People or the regular fashion magazines. And those magazines tended to pay a little less, actually a lot less. That's just a little FYI. With that said, to get to do setup shots is a pretty good and highly coveted gig. You get the call or text to be at a certain location at a certain time. You wait for the talent to leave or arrive, and in New York City, that often happens from a hotel or an event. The talent often knows you'll be there, but you need to clarify that with whoever called you first. It just makes for a smoother process if the talent is, quote unquote, in on it. You take the photos, you submit them for approval if that's required. They pick the ones they want, and you delete the rest. You may or may not own the rights to the photos. I own all of mine. You may or may not get paid. I never received a dime. What I did get was a good clean photo or photos, an easy shoot. I could submit them to my photo agency for sale and use them indefinitely for whatever purpose I choose. And every cent I make is my own. Stylists like Law can initiate the requests. It could be the brands, also PR, management, the talent themselves, photo agencies like Getty Images, Backgrid, Splash, Shutterstock. And speaking of Splash, they are rumored to have worked closely with the Kardashians back in the day. So, okay, back to Law. So I did receive a couple of those texts, calls about photographing Zendaya. So I went to the hotel to take photos of Z as she was leaving for media appearances. I took the photos. Her father was there, said nothing to me. Okay. Z only spoke when I think once I said thank you, and she gave me a seemingly shocked, "You're welcome." With that said, I was never formally introduced to either one of them, Z or her father. Law himself said very little to me and was strictly all business. And Law at this time wasn't the Law that we know now. He wasn't out front and center. He kind of played his position. He was always sort of behind Z and, her dad. And her dad was the person who was like by her side all the time. Her mom also traveled with her as well. If there was any hint as to Law's true ambitions back then, he hid them very well. Or so I thought. But there was something he said to me back then that really stuck with me over the years. Something in retrospect that clearly showed his hand. There was another path that Law'd work with unbeknownst to me. It's not like he has to consult with me or anything. And this guy also photographed Zendaya. Cool. Like I said, Z never really said anything to me. The dad never said anything. It's kind of low-key, mugged me, whatever. I just want to say I'm always polite to a fault when it comes to working with or photographing young talent. I always defer to the parents. I always try to make all parties feel as comfortable as possible. Okay, Z had an appearance at The View. I photographed her leaving her hotel. Then I went to The View to take another photo of her just in case she made some kind of wardrobe change. Different set of clothes equals different set of photos equals additional sales. Okay, so I take a photo of Z leaving. The other pap pulls up, and I think he either takes a photo of Z as she's getting into the car, or Z has gotten into the car and she leaves the car and poses for a photo for him, and he takes the photo. I'm not really sure about what transpired exactly. Like I said, it's been a pandemic and about 10 years since all this has happened. But this is what I do remember. Z and her dad were greeting this pap like they were besties, like someone who was clearly invited to the cookout and could bring the dish of his choice. So I was like, okay. I was starting to get into my feelings, as they say, which is not a very good place to be. So I thought maybe they would have warmed up to me if I had more contact with them or had been formally introduced, but I doubt it. Okay, so me and my bruised ego approached Law. I told him that perhaps because Zendaya and her father seemed so chummy with the pap, let him be her sole photographer. I'm sure I was trying not to be salty and failing miserably. Law said this to me, that he was the one who made the decisions about who photographs Z, not her parents. He chooses the photographers, and I essentially was not to worry. Fast forward years later, Z's parents are nowhere in sight. And where is Law? On the red carpet next to Z, a part of her inner circle. He has appeared in ad campaigns with her, and he sat next to her on the front row of coveted couture fashion events. I'll get to a little later how such an event was a catalyst for Law quitting the styling business. Okay, Z's press run ended and she went back to California. I did continue to work with Law, not with Brandy, but with Tamar. Yes, Tamar Braxton, the reality star, the over-the-top personality. Tamar had a fashion line which Law helped her out with. I got the call, took the photos, they were published, and that was that. And about Tamar, she was the nicest. She was like shy almost, cooperative, took direction extremely well. Absolutely nothing like her public.com image. Law would return to LA, and I wouldn't see him until the following year, 2016, when he became him after getting the call to style Celine Dion. I would get my last text from Law in 2016, and it was to photograph Celine leaving her hotel. I missed that text, and so did the other pap Law used to work with. And that was the last time either one of us heard from Law again.